Robert, welcome back to Waterstones.
Thanks, Will.
This book is really something. I was lucky enough to hear you sort of presenting it recently, and it was a very impassioned presentation. It was really charged with something very political, but also very personal. Mm-hmm. Is that a fair summary?
Yeah, well, I hope so. I felt it in the heart. I mean, I felt it in the heart for 4 years writing it. And in that time, its subject, which is the lives, the deaths, the rights of rivers, has only grown more severe, I suppose, more serious. I mean, our rivers are dying. That's where we are. There's not a single river in England and Wales that is in good overall ecological health. That's a kind of technical designation. And another way of thinking about that is that rivers that we could once drink have become rivers we can no longer swim in, have become rivers we can no longer even touch in certain places. Something has gone catastrophically wrong, and we are feeling that, I think, in the heart as well as just visibly all around us.
There's a lovely bit at the beginning of the book, and it is, of course, often children who say the simplest and most profound things. Yeah. You're on a walk with your son, Will.
Yeah.
Excellent name, by the way. And he spots straight away that something isn't right, and he asks you whether the water has died.
Yeah.
And a little bit later as well, you talk about a walk you're having with him, and he asks you about the book that you're working on, and you say, it's called Is a River Alive? And he rather brilliantly says, well, duh, it's going to be a really short book if that's what it's called, because of course it is. And why is it not that simple?
Yeah, of course The River is Alive. It's a one-word book, yes. It's not, it's a 300-page book. It's a very complicated question. And I remember I wrote it down 4 years ago, three questions actually. It was one of three. Can a forest think? Does a mountain remember? And is a river alive? And I think they form a little kin group, a little family of siblings, and they've all been very good questions to spend time with, and I have done. But it's the third of them, that one, that really puzzled me and seized me. It's a searching question, because what it really asks is, what do we mean by life? What do we mean by alive? A river is a beautiful test case for this, because they are such kind of sinuous, willful, wild, agential presences in our landscapes. I sometimes think of them as gods, and many of them are named after gods, the Shinnon, the Shannon, the Deva, the Dee. And yet, 10,000 years after many of them started flowing, they are desperately wounded. They have no rights. You and I could go and found a corporation registered at a company's house today, and tomorrow that company would have more rights and would have legal standing. The river that's flowed for 10,000 years has no rights and has no legal standing, has no right to be represented in court. So what has happened to our rivers here, and it's a global book, and I'm talking globally as well, it is a failure of imagination as well as of legislation. And the two are not really separable. We make law in the ways we dream, and the laws that we have in turn shape back the dreams that we can imagine. So how do we imagine water otherwise? How do we dream rivers otherwise, legally and socially and culturally? Well, there are good answers to that elsewhere in the world, and I went looking for them, and that's why the answer is not just one word. And it was also that I began the Journeys in doubt, and I want readers to begin it in doubt, because I think it is a hard question, isn't it? I mean, is a river alive?
Well, as you say, a very hard question, and one which is not the same as sort of saying, is a river a beautiful natural thing that should be protected?
Exactly.
It's a very different question. As you say, it is a global book, and you take us to three places in particular, and the first of those, the cloud forest in Ecuador, is interesting because you mentioned there about the legalities of it, and Ecuador, within its constitution, has a legal change, which is really important, which is it contains the rights of nature are enshrined in their constitution.
Exactly.
Tell me what that means and why it's so significant.
So in 2008, Ecuador reimagined its constitution after the election of Rafael Correa the previous year, and I think Ecuador has this huge moral imagination. That's manifested in lots of ways. One of them is this extraordinary constitution that was drawn up in a highly kind of consensual, social way, we could say. And into the Constitution went these 4 articles recognising the rights of nature, the right to flourish, the right to evolve, the right to fulfil its natural systems, as it were. They're kind of beautiful legalese, which is not a phrase one often says. And so they're there in the highest kind of document of the land, as it were, the rules of the democracy. And it's taken a while for them to really manifest in terms of change on the ground, but in this extraordinary cloud forest, Los Cedros, the cedar forest, through which run numerous rivers, including this beautiful kind of gin-clear watered river, Rio Los Cedros, the river of the cedars, was about to be pretty much entirely destroyed by gold and copper mining, which is sort of open pit mining, and cyanidation is used to leach out the gold from the tailings. I mean, it's just a brutal process. And this forest is one of the most alive, one of the most kind of statistically biodiverse and abundant places in the world. And the miners were coming, and then this extraordinary ruling was handed down in November 2021, which used the power of those rights of nature articles to assert and recognise the right of the forest and its rivers to thrive. And it was a very powerful ruling, and it resulted in the ejection of a state mining company in Army in combination with a Canadian mining company. So, real force was pushed back from the brink of the forest. It was thrilling. The rivers still run clear, and I went there to in effect, follow that river and the story of that river back to its source, and that's what we did.
You're also following one of my favourite characters from the book. I'm calling her a character, but she's a real person, Juliana.
Juliana, yeah.
Who is an expert on fungi,
yes.
and who has this almost supernatural sense for locating very unique fungi. She describes it as being like a glitch in the matrix,
yes.
doesn't she? And she
yes.
just sort of runs off and then discovers these
there
mushrooms.
They are, yeah.
But there is... I mean, tell me a bit more about her as a person, because she is absolutely amazing and responsible for some of the most wonderful descriptions of how there's an amazing bit where a tree has fallen down and there's this bioluminescent
yes.
fungi inside the tree, which is like a river inside the tree, basically, sort of glowing.
A river of light, exactly. Yes, Juliana is all of these things. I'm so glad you call her a character, because she is a character. They're all, so at the heart of the book, there are these 3 rivers, 3 sections, and 3 main characters. And each of these main characters, and this is where it gets metaphysically fascinating to me, in ways that I absolutely had no foreknowledge of, were suffering from proximity to death. And each of them is brought back to life by water, by rivers. And that was one of the many ways in which this book kind of overflowed my expectations of it and began to perform its own proofs in these startling ways. But yeah, Juliana, when you say a nearly supernatural way of finding, no, fully supernatural. if supernature is that which we cannot explain within the bounds of the rational, Juliana would we were out looking for these tiny new species, second collections of a new species of the Psilocybe genus, the magic mushrooms as they're more commonly known. And she would be 100 yards from the find site of a tiny brown witch-hatted mushroom on a brown forest floor. And she would say, yep, I think they're near, I think I can hear them now. And we would turn a corner, and then another corner, and then another corner, and then she would flop to her belly as though she'd been shot and let out a huge woohoo! And there, right in front of her, would be this single tiny mushroom. So these are unaccountable things to me, but I saw them happen. And the book is full of miracles, as the world is. And I have found, in the time that I've been walking and writing, moving into landscape, talking with people and with places, that these surprises lie all around us. And the best thing I can do is simply write them down as they happen. And it's one of the most exciting things as a writer is meeting these moments as they unfold, and then really trying to find a language that will just carry the astonishment without exaggeration, but also without diminishment.
you mentioned that there are these three distinct characters, I suppose, one per location.
Yeah.
In the second section of the book, you take us to Chennai
Yep.
in India, and you meet Yuvan,
yeah.
who has had a really horrible start in life, suffering a lot of abuse from a stepfather, but has escaped that, literally escaped, and self-taught himself about the natural world, which I found fascinating. Tell me a bit about him and his healing through the rivers.
Yeah, well, he would say he didn't teach himself. He would say he was taught, but he was taught by the rivers, by the trees, by the insects, by the birds. He has one of the most kind of generous and inclusive visions of what life means. Life to Yuvan is all about relation. We are always in relation, and that becomes the keynote of that section of the book. Watching how water moves through bodies. We are water bodies. We are lakes now that we're seated, and we're rivers when we're moving. We are all part of the water cycle, as well as living within a watershed. And Yuvan helped me kind of understand that, because water in Chennai it's both monstrous and ghostly. It gets suppressed, becomes ghostly by forms of development and mismanagement and amnesia, and then every year it roars monstrously back when the monsoon comes, and particularly when cyclones come, slightly less than annually frequently. So Yuvan is trying again to dream another way of living with water, a way that recognises its own metamorphoses, its own cycles through humans, and really to sort of see what a just vision of a water city, which Chennai is, might look like. And as you say, in a way, the miracle of it is that everything that happened to him, in a way, should have corroded him, and yet he converted it into this extraordinary outwards tending, relation-making goodness. And I still find it astonishingly moving to contemplate. We've been friends for years. He's young. He's still in his 20s, but he's remaking the world.
To give people an idea of the malignancy of what we're talking about in an area like Chennai, there's an extraordinary moment where you talk about how this is an area where industry has destroyed the rivers, leading them to be polluted with effluent that runs off from those factories. And in a way of protecting their ability to do that, there was this map that was drawn up of the city.
The fraud map.
Yeah, where... is it Enor Creek?
It's Yenor.
Simply disappeared in order to not have to look after it, basically.
Yeah.
Which seems extraordinary to me that still exists as the map, like it is still.
Well, it's finally been taken down now, but for years and years that survived. Yes, so this is what Yuvan and his friends call the fraud map, and as you say, it was a sort of state. The state was obliged to zone industries with respect to natural features. It had already allowed the kind of rampant overdevelopment of red list industries in a particular region to the north of Chennai, and that was simply incompatible with the zoning that it was being asked to undertake. So what do you do? Well, you can disappear the river. You redraw the map, and they erased a stretch of Yenor Creek, which is a sort of backwater of the Kosastalaya River, which is one of the three great rivers of Chennai, and it simply disappeared. And the work that I've always been interested in cartography. It's been a theme running all the way through, and I've become increasingly interested in what we could call counter mapping. So in a way, the fraud map is a counter map. It's a counter map to the map is not the territory, as they say. But then Yuvan and his friends are all involved in counter mapping the counter map. So kind of restoring water to the map, but also to the map of the mind, the map of the memory, the map of community, and allowing those relations to flourish. So they work very closely with the fisher folk in that area, who are often basically the most economically and politically marginalised of people there, but are also the ones who are wading, trying to collect fish and crustaceans, and literally getting their skin burned because the water that's being released from the thermal power plants is as part of the cooling process is so hot. So these young people are working in astonishingly difficult situations against enormous power structures, and they left me just with this sense that despair is a luxury. Right? It's anyone seeing what they do there is no excuse to wake up and think, I cannot try as hard as I possibly can to drive change.
You do roll up your shirt sleeves in Chennai because there's a lovely scene where you are helping to protect and save the olive ridley turtle eggs.
Yeah.
And this is really important. You make the point that the sexing of these eggs is temperature related.
Yes.
And when we talk about temperature rises in sea and in the climate, you point out why this is important, because we're getting very close to a point where those olive ridley turtles may only be one sex if it gets too
female.
Which would lead, of course, to their extinction.
Yeah.
When you're there, as I said, sort of shirt sleeves rolled up.
Yeah, right up to my shoulder in the sand.
Yeah.
Digging out these turtle eggs one by one. Part of this organisation called the Turtle Patrol that's been doing this for nearly 30 years now. What did it feel like?
What does it? I suppose does it feel like you are? I suppose there must be a good feeling of doing something.
Yes.
But is there? You talk about hope and futility as being the twin streams that feed a waterfall.
Yeah.
So, is it that constant battle against those two things?
Well, we walked overnight, as they do every night during olive ridley nesting season, which goes on for weeks, sort of January, February, sometimes into March. And they walk every night because the peril to the mother turtles and to the nest and then to the hatchlings is so great now that they need this guardianship. And guardians turn up all the way through this book. And the rivers are our guardians as well, and the turtles too. It's reciprocal work. But you walk the beach, and for every nest you come across, you also come across a dead mother turtle. These extraordinary beings, kind of hollow-eyed because the ghost crabs have eaten their eyeballs out, and they've almost all died through trawler strike or netting. And in fact, this year we're speaking only a month or so after the nesting season, and I heard from Aaron, who's in the book, just a week ago, and he said we've had a tragic and a beautiful season. We've had by far the largest number of dead turtles, mother turtles, wash up. We've also had by far the largest number of hatchlings. So these trawlers are kind of cruising illegally close to the shore, and these mothers, these tens of thousands of mothers converging in the dark ocean, following these ancient instincts. All they know is they must reach this stretch of beach, paddle up, flipper up, dig, lay these 100 ping-pong-sized, ball-sized eggs, and then return to the deep. And it's deeply beautiful, deeply moving, and that chapter ends really with the first of the year's hatchlings. It was amazing. We absolutely exhausted, 6 in the morning, and then there's a cry, "Come, look, the sand's moving in the hatchery." And there was the first little turtle, and I carried her out, probably her, and pointed her towards the waves, and off she went eventually.
The third section of the book takes us somewhere entirely different, the wilds of Canada. The Magpie River I know I'm going to mispronounce this, but it's Nitassinan.
Nitassinan, no, okay. Good, yeah, great. So the distinction here is between, as it were, settler naming, so Quebec in Canada and the Magpie River, and Innu naming, so Nitassinan, which means the homeland in Innu Aiman, the Innu language, and the Muteshikaushipu, which means the river who flows between square blocky cliffs in Innu Aiman. So I call it, there's a central character there, Rita, Mestakosha, this astonishing Innu poet and activist and campaigner and community leader who's still a dear friend, and we're working on translations of her poems now, and I remain very involved in fact, in all 3 places I remain very involved. But yes, so I call it the Muteshikaushipu in recognition of the Innu prior occupancy.
Rita is not the main character, I would say, maybe of that section, and yet she is like an overarching character, it feels, in the book, because she's so extraordinary. She gives you some really quite strict rules. So you're there with Wayne, who we'll talk about in a moment. Yeah. But you're both given some really quite strict rules by her for you're doing this journey across a lake and then down the river. A really dangerous journey, it feels like, I have to say, reading it. If I didn't know that you got home and finished the book, I would have been really worried reading it, because it's genuinely dangerous what you're doing.
It felt. I mean, my body's a little older than it was these days. about to crack 50 in 18 months or so. But yeah, old bones. But there were times when I wondered if I'd make older bones.
But she gives you these, I guess, these instructions, and these instructions are for you, I suppose, to get what you need from this journey. And this is where we really do get into a territory which, I guess, for some readers might, this like really testing how far will you go with this idea of is a river alive?
Yeah.
And she interestingly says to you that it's not so much about you writing about the river, that the river will talk to you.
Yeah, or will communicate. Yeah, exactly.
Which is a very different thing.
Absolutely.
Tell me a bit about Rita's instructions and why they were important.
Yeah, the first thing to say is I didn't seek them. I just went to talk to her, and the one thing I wanted to do was to ask her permission to descend the river. And that seemed important, and she just laughed at me. And she said, "Oh, you don't need my permission, you need the river's permission," which felt like a blessing and a curse. It was like, well, how do I seek the river's permission? But then she's an astonishing, incisive, visionary person. And she gave Wayne and me these series of instructions. Always pitch our tents facing east, so the sun would greet us every morning. Gather water for her from a particular place, Labrador tea from another place, stone from a third place. And then we should fast for ideally 24 hours, which we did to significant consequence, particularly for Wayne. And I should seek a sacred tree, because I'd asked her that one of the running themes of the book is the Epic of Gilgamesh and this idea of a sacred forest and sacred trees, which runs through world literature. And she told me I would find a sacred tree. But the key thing was, look with your heart and not with your eyes. Put your notebooks away. That really hurt as a writer. And you can ask one question of the river. And it mustn't be, will I be rich? Will my children grow up to be happy? I got one question, and if I asked the right question, the river would answer it.
We are not going to give away what that is. But it's interesting that you don't know what it is until you do know what it is.
Absolutely. And I really didn't. I mean, there's no guile in what happens towards the very end of the book, which is where I realised in retrospect all rivers had been flowing to that point. And in a way, that point would never have been reached had I not spent the years prior to that I had on water, with water people, with river people. But yes, I will never forget what happened, and the answer that came was in a form that doesn't bear easy communication.
I want to come to how you do bring all three of the storylines, if you like, together, or the tributaries, if you like, to this river. But before that, I want to talk about Wayne briefly. Yes, yeah. Because he is another amazing character, and as you say, another person whose proximity to death is changed by his time with you on that river. Can you tell us a little bit about his situation?
Yes. Well, Wayne is a very hard man to summarise, as you will know. And I said with these extraordinary people, there's the poet John Clare, 19th century poet. He says somebody's saying nice things about his poems, and he says, "Oh, I just went out and walked in the fields. I picked them up and then only wrote them down." And it feels like that with these people. I mean, Rita, Wayne, Juan, Juliana. It's been lovely to talk to you about them. Really, they almost sort of tumble straight out of life and onto the page. So they're kind of transcriptions in a way of these extraordinary people. But yeah, Wayne had lost someone very dear to him. He himself is a very itinerant, very intelligent, very intellectually and sort of geologically restless human, and one of the most inquiring minds I ever know. He kind of turns ideas up and shakes them upside down, sees what falls out of their pockets. And so I knew that he'd be an extraordinary person to have along. And so he proved. But he'd lost this dear friend, and I suppose I don't know what to call it, my kind of humanist self longed for him to be fully healed by the river, by the experience of the river. That didn't happen because Wayne is resistant to pieties. He's highly heterodox in every respect. But all the way through, we could feel the ghost of Paul, his friend, present and recurring in these images and happenings in the midst of the river, and the river's own ability to generate metaphysics as a kind of steam out of itself. Paul was always there. Wayne was in complex, kind of often silent conversation with his ghost and with his legacies. And so a negotiation happened, not a closure, but a growing towards certainly happened. But Wayne didn't end the river healed, certainly not, and I wouldn't have expected him to. But the river did wear us both away. It wore away the shells and the layers of experience in ways that I haven't even felt that powerfully in mountains. And I've spent very long periods of time in very big mountains. But the river, well, I say very early on in the book, in English, there is no verb to river, but what could be more of a verb than a river? And I really felt its status as a verb in those final days.
I was really interested to hear you say earlier that you hadn't, I suppose, set out knowing that these three different places would be very neatly tied together, and yet you must have come back from those three places, reflected on those experiences, and found a very beautiful way of linking them through poetry, through literature, through those people. And as you say, the ability for those different rivers to have changed something about the people who had encountered them, and it was all to do with enlivening them again.
Yeah, exactly.
Is that what makes a river alive, its ability to do that? Or is it, again, very egocentric for us to think that we need to get something from it,
That's a beautiful and wise question, and really well put. Yes, rivers enliven us. We possess the power to wound water, and we possess the power to help it heal as well. And rivers heal themselves with astonishing swiftness, and in so doing, they heal us as well. And I think that idea of enlivening is, in a way, one of the big arguments of the book, is that we need to move away from thinking of life as these little singular, kind of almost Newtonian units of being that sort of roll around the world and occasionally bump into each other, as we're doing now, and bump off each other. But actually life is river. It is continually tumbling. It is continually in relation, in process. And we are always in it, even if we think we're standing dry-footed on the bank. And one of the other big, I suppose, preoccupations of the book, is one that I've been writing about forever, is language. And the ways that language possesses power either to objectify and alienate and externalize the living world, the natural world, or possesses what I call in the book, after Robin Wall Kimmerer, a grammar of animacy. That is an ability to recognize relation, reciprocity, our absolute immersion in the river of the world. And over the course of the book, language itself begins to liquefy. And I've always been interested in the limits of non-fiction, particularly the kind of vision of it as a negative entity. It's not fiction. But actually non-fiction is this extraordinary, vast terrain and repertoire of ways of being and ways of seeing and ways of thinking, ways of writing. It bears a responsibility to truth and to fact, and that remains very, very important to me. But I've always been interested in what happens when we bring in techniques from fiction, when we bring in anthropology, cultural history, vision, poetry, the lyric voice, and use all of those to create a new form. And the river really brought itself to bear upon language in this book. So by the end, as you know, let's say full stops have left the building.
That's a great... I would never have said that myself, but that's a great way of summing up. No, because I found myself, I read the book in quite a concentrated period, and so I felt like I'd been on a very intense journey, of course, but also similarly transformed in some way by that process. Not in, of course, as dramatic a way as the people that you talk about, or indeed yourself, those journeys, but it really is. It's a fantastic experience for the reader. You say actually at the outset of the book that you want to sort of show what transformations occur when rivers are recognised as both alive and killable. You give an idea of that through the writing and the reading of the book, but thinking about the wider world, given that these three rivers have been attacked by mining in one case, industry in the other, and hydroelectric power in the third case, there's always going to be this battle, isn't there, between what is needed by human beings in the world that they live in, and the benefit of seeing the rivers in another way.
Yeah, yeah.
What do you think is the key, I suppose, to convincing people that the real benefit to us is to think of those rivers as alive, whatever the cost might be to us in other ways?
Well, I think I say that the fate of rivers under rationalism has been to become one-dimensional water. So really we broadly now only think of rivers in terms of their service provision, their ecosystem provision. So the river as resource, as opposed to this old and various and powerful idea of the river as life force. So it's not that we need to occupy only the notion of life force, but that we have almost entirely forgotten that. And yet there are these beautiful stirrings just under the surface. This kind of feeling is a sort of groundwater that then rises as springs and begins to bubble. And these are exciting places in culture. And they're all around us at the moment as well. So I think one of to me, the most moving and hopeful aspects of the crisis that we're in with water at the moment is actually seeing the forms of citizen action, the forms of citizen science, campaigning, activism, wild swimming groups, kayaking groups, river-loving groups, all beginning to come together to organise, to make their voices heard, to stand in guardianship and loving relationship to our rivers. So I think that it's all there still, actually. It's just that power and time have pushed it below the surface. But I think we will see everything change now for the better. Slowly, it will be the work of many hands. But as hope is the thing with rivers, and I do believe that very strongly.
I knew that even a long conversation would only allow us to touch on some of the aspects of this book. It really is filled with so much for the reader. So thank you for having this conversation with me, Robert.
I loved it. Thank you. I really, really did. Thanks, Will.